Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome to my lecture. So in this today's lecture, I'll be talking about uncertainty, and as you know, in economics, especially in microeconomics, uncertainty becomes one of the very important points of the discussions, because uncertainty gives certain measure which one individuals or the collectives, also from the policymakers point of view, it is very important to take into account while calculating risk and the choices. So before moving further, so we'll talk about uncertainty in context of choice and the risk. And uncertainty needs to be taken into account when we talk about the choice from different alternatives, especially when resource is scarce, and then when risk is associated with certain economic outcomes. So let us first begin with some of the concepts that we should be knowing it. First is making a choice involves considerable uncertainty, because sometimes if resources and utility are known, and then from there we can make the choice, like optimization conditions at the individual level that we spoke about, when indifference curve is tangent to the budget line. So when resource, for example, budget is known, and then we are quite certain that what choice that we have to make, then that optimization can happen. But then imagine a case where there is a risk associated with, and I also don't know what is my expected outcome or expected utility that I'm planning to derive from that given alternatives. So in that case, uncertainty is involved, and uncertainty is like outcome that has a probability, and we are not very sure which outcome that we are talking about. So especially we can take many examples, for example in lottery, or say gambling, or say or investment in the stock market. So it is all about what is my choice that would be, but then this choice is full of uncertainties that we have to minimize in order to maximize our utility from that. So therefore, when we are talking about uncertainty, we basically choose how much risk to bear. So uncertainty is certainly, when we talk about uncertainty or choice within uncertainty, then we are also kind of prepared to bear the risk. The second point, the context, that individual behavior may sometimes seem unpredictable, and even sometimes it is irrational. Unpredictable in a sense, for instance, there is a coin that we are making it, and we are not sure head or tail is coming. So its probability is basically half, like 0.5 and 0.5, and sometimes it's very unpredictable. I'm not sure, or say both the teams, like cricket teams, both the captains are actually making the toss, and then at the beginning and in the process of making toss, so they don't know, and both of them are absolutely unaware what outcome that they will be getting it. So it is unpredictable in the uncertainty, especially with the probability that we have. And then sometimes it becomes even irrational. So this is actually contrary to what we actually know from microeconomics, especially from the consumers theory. So when we are talking about choice and uncertainty, that here we are trying to refer microeconomics point of view, and therefore consumer theory that we are talking about. So but then one can also understand from policymakers point of view as well, when policymakers frame any policy, and then what kind of uncertainties and how consumer will make the choices, and how say the risk will be associated, and that particular discussion actually needs to be taken very seriously, because it has certain choice and optimization conditions. Measuring risk, so another one important point that we are trying to discuss here, and that is risk. So measuring risk, how we measure risk quantitatively, all possible outcomes of a particular action or event and the likelihood that each outcome will occur, that needs to be noted. So basically the outcome, or say for example outcome of any commodity, like X is a commodity, and then outcome of X, like it could be X1, X2, X3, and then what is the outcome or the probability of getting each outcome like X1 and X2, and then whatever we get, everything has to be noted, and that's how we measure the risk. And then how whether any investment, whether that is risky investment or not, or say what are the risks associated with certain amount of work or certain activities, through which consumer will decide whether consumer will go for insurance or go for buying insurance or not. So this all depends on what are the risks associated with certain activities. For example, one can also insure, like for instance, of the house or the health, or say or car. So one person is completely aware that what are the risks that are associated with that particular activities, and therefore accordingly insurance will be purchased. So there is definitely a market around this, and therefore risk quantitatively measuring risk quantitatively becomes very, very important. The fourth concept that we need to understand, and that is probability. And probability is the likelihood that a given outcome will occur. So we will not get much more in details about uncertainty, choice and risk, but then certainly some of the technicalities or technical details of choice, uncertainty and risk that we are going to discuss in this particular in this lecture, and also in our next couple of lectures. So now let's move forward, and this is expected value that we really need to understand first. So expected value associated with an uncertain situation. So this is how it is defined. The expected value associated with uncertain situations is a weighted average of payoffs or values associated with all possible outcomes. So payoff that we are referring here as associated values associated with all possible outcomes. So all possible outcomes that we are discussing here, we are referring as payoffs. Now the probabilities of each outcome are used as weights. So each outcome that we are getting it, like say x1, x2 and x3, and each outcome will have the probability, because we are not certain about that particular outcome, and therefore we have to give the weight to that. So now let's see how it comes. Like say X is a commodity or the outcome that we're looking for, and then it has many points or events, like say x1, x2, x3 and xn, and then we're not certain like whether we get x1 as definite outcome or x2 as definite outcome or xn definite outcome, and therefore probability is associated with this. So corresponding x1, we get the probability of x1, then we get probability of x2, then we get probability of x3, likewise probability of xn, right? So when we say that weighted average of payoffs, so So what is the total value of x1? It's like x1 p x1, and then here x2 p x2, here x3 p x3, likewise xn p xn, right? So when we get the all the expected value of x of all the outcomes that we got it, like x1, x2, x3 and xn. So expected value of x will be summation of xp x1 plus x2 p x2 plus x3 p x3 plus xn p xn. So we can write as summation of xi and pxi, where I equals to 1 by n. So this is how we calculate expected value of x. So this is the mathematical way that we calculate. So first is individual outcomes will be there, like x1, x2, x3, and also individual probability that are associated with each outcome, like px1, px2, likewise pxn. And when we try to calculate expected value of x, is basically nothing, is summation of all the value associated with each outcome, like x1, x2 and x3. And this is what we call expected value, and this is how we calculate expected value. Next is expected utility. So some of the utilities similar the way we discussed about expected value. So here some of the utilities associated with all possible outcomes weighted by the probability of each outcome will occur, right? So now we already discussed about x1, then x2, then x3, likewise xn. So from an individual's perspective, so x1, from x1, any person, any individual will derive its utility, and that will be referred as, say, ux1. And then from x2, utility that will be derived is ux2, and then utility from x3, it is ux3, likewise utility for xn is basically ux1. So when we get a set of events or possible outcomes, it's like x1, x2, x3 from consumer's point of view. So whether consumer will choose x1, x2, x3 or xn actually depends on what kind of utilities that consumer deriving from each outcomes. So whether I choose x1 or x2, so it is, for me, it is very important to calculate what level of utility or the satisfactions that I'm deriving from x1 or x2, and therefore calculating utility of x1, utility of x2, utility of x3 and utility of xn is very important to calculate. So now for x1, since we are not very certain that this all the events will get, so therefore each events or each outcome, possible outcomes, has a probability. So so probability that will be associated with x1 is px1, and then probability associated with x2 is px2, and then probability associated with x3 is px3, likewise probability associated with xn is pxn. So when we say that expected utility, so in expected value, in case of expected value, we calculated x1 with x1 with px1, x2 with px2 and x3 with px3. So in this particular expected utility calculations, we will like expected utility of x will be x1 ux1 plus x2 ux2 plus x3 ux3, likewise xn uxn. So if we sum this up, summation of xi uxi, where I equals to 1 to n. So this is how we calculate the value of the expected utility. So in case of uncertainty. So in case of certainty, we know about x1 and x2, and I know the choices that will be made between x1 and x2, and there we calculate the utility. But in case of uncertainty, so we have to calculate the expected value, and this expected value comes from the probability and then the weighted by the probability of each outcome, and that's how we get the expected utility. So now let's move forward with the third important concept, and that is risk. And in the risk, we have we'll discuss about what does risk means, and especially the preferences for risk. So there are three broad concepts of risk and three types of risk, and we already discussed what is risk. So first is risk aversion, that conditions of preferring a certain income to a risky income with the same expected value. So risk aversion, in a sense, like for any individual, that is the rational, like for all of us, like any individuals who do not want to take any risk, and that is a general tendency. So they will try to averse or they will try to avoid taking any risk, and therefore that particular outcome is basically the risk aversion. So we see like the more we are risk averse, more we'll spend to spend money to buying health insurance, or say car insurance, or say house insurance. So more we are scared of the loss, and that's the point. At that particular cases where I am scared of losing, if anything happens, losing money or anything. So in that particular context, that I'll be more, my expected expenditure towards the insurance will be much more higher. So more I spend on the on the insurance, that means I'm more and more risk averse person. So this is very general, and this is a more general cases that people should be risk averse than risk loving. So risk neutral is basically I'm indifferent whether I want to take any risk or I want to go for buying insurance. So I'm a neutral. So but then risk loving is basically when I know that I have two options or two choices. One, say choice 1, I have certain level of income. Choice 2, I have certain level of income or more income than the my average income, but then that particular activities is associated with risk. So if I win, then I'll have more than what is my average income, but if I lose, then it will be absolutely zero. So it is like stock market can be taken as one of the examples where people, if you see people are spending more and more or spending more time with stock market or investing more and more on the stock market. So it's basically they are risk loving persons, and that's how they will calculate what is the expected value. So with the expected value calculations, we can easily calculate or easily understand risk aversion, risk neutral, and risk loving. Right. So so this is these are the three basic points on the risk that we want to introduce first before getting into in details about the risk and how we actually calculate and how our different sort of markets are formed. So one important point is like risk premium. When we talk about risk and like risk aversion or risk neutral or risk loving, so risk premium also is important there, because maximum amount of money that a risk averse person will pay to avoid taking any risk. So risk premium is basically for the person who are risk averse, but then this can also be looking at when we talk about risk loving, because risk loving also risk loving persons also will calculate risk premium. So if risk premium is very high, like insurance, if it is very high, there are many people who are who avoid paying or who avoid buying insurance or paying the premium, and then they will take some risk to go ahead with that particular activities. So let us take a couple of examples here. So if we look at American economy, United States economy, and there we see for each and everything insurance policies are there. So there are like some people are taking 100% insurance, even for people who are going for going for swimming. So they also take some sort of insurance that will cover if anything happens during the swimming, or entire house will be covered for any kind of hazard, whether it is fire or whether it is for extreme weathers. So they generally take insurance for the entire house. Similarly, they also take the health insurance. So here, I mean, when we talk about risk premium, so that is where people they calculate, and that is how people they join the job, like whether they can actually from their present income, whether they can cover all sort of insurance or the risk premium that they are looking for. So that is one way to look into it. And some people they actually end up doing more than one jobs, like 2 or 3 jobs, just to cover some of the insurance, right? And there are also many cases where people join certain jobs because some of the companies they actually take care of certain amount of the insurance of that particular person. So this is very typical consumer behavior towards buying insurance or towards looking at the risk, and that's how job market, or that's how the entire populations in a country where insurance policies are mandatory, that's how they look into it. So in our case, in our case, like in India, for instance, in case of crop that we see, crop insurance, or for the health insurance we also see, there are also many cases that we have come across. Many literature also shows that people they actually averse to buying, not they are averse to risk, but they are averse to buying insurance because for them insurance premium becomes very high, and therefore they calculate the expected value of the economic outcome with insurance and without insurance, and then finally they choose which one to go ahead with. So this one insurance, especially risk premium point of view, for risk averse and risk loving, for both these two groups, risk premium, calculating risk premium is very, very, very important. So in this particular, when we are talking about concept of risk and preferences, I would like to introduce one more concept here, and that is the marginal utility. So when we are talking about x1, x2, and then xn, and we are talking about u1 that we are deriving from x1, like utility. So utility from x2 is ux2. Likewise, utility for xn, that we get uxn, right? So this is our like understanding each outcome from utilities point of view. But then when we know the total utility or calculate utility, we also need to understand marginal utility. So marginal utility from x1 will be marginal utility for x1, marginal utility for x2, and marginal utility for xn. So this is how we calculate. And then here, since it is risk and we are not very certain, even after calculating marginal utility, we are also supposed to calculate probability here. So that's how expected value that will be calculated. So not only x1, u1 and p1 and p2 and pn is important, but at the same time, when a person or any individual, when we calculate the premium or risk aversion behavior or risk loving behavior, for us it's very important to understand marginal utility. When we are talking about marginal utility, so it's from consumer behaviors and from consumers understanding of utility from that particular chapter that we already discussed. We are also supposed to know that what is the nature of the marginal utility. So generally, marginal utility is basically the diminishing returns. As outcome or income increases, use of that particular commodity will start declining. So this is marginal utility. And then along with the marginal utility, one also needs to understand the nature of diminishing return. As I said, that we will not discuss much more in details, but definitely we will talk about all the technical details that are required to understand risk, uncertainty and choice, because these three concepts are very important in different markets and also from the policy, public policy point of view. So I'll stop here and we'll continue our discussion of marginal utility and diminishing returns characteristics with regard to marginal utility, and then we'll discuss with regard to risk aversion, risk neutral and risk loving context. And these are the three books that I have used. You can also go ahead with a couple of selected chapters from Holler Variant, Pindy Grubenfield and Jonathan Gruber. This will help you much more in details about certain examples that these books actually have taken. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you in my next lecture.